made a bunch of videos recently which are pretty depressing in some ways, because they're all about this impasse which I find myself at sometimes, which is, I guess, the economics of suffering, if I can put it that way. You know, this idea that that life is crap. Now you don't have to accept that as a proposition, but I don't always accept it myself, but sometimes I do, and I think there's a lot of arguments to be made that it's a correct proposition. Twit from Uranus left a comment on my channel, which was a pastiche from the line from 2001: A Space Odyssey, where he says, "My God, it's full of stars." And Twit from Uranus's version was, "My God, it's full of shit." And certainly there's a way of looking at that. I mean, I'm reminded of that quote from Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes, where he says about the life of early man being nasty, brutish and short. And that's not just the life of early man though, is it? That's the life of pretty much every living creature out there. Nasty, brutish and short. Not exclusively. I'm sure there are moments of pleasure, but the moments of pleasure are there. After all, desire is there as the carrot that drives you on to the next experience. And keeps you functioning in a world which is largely stick, never mind with only the occasional carrot. So not only is the life of early man nasty, brutish and short, the life of most animals and most sentient creatures is nasty, brutish and short. And that's not just early man, of course. The life of most people these days, sad but true, is still fairly nasty, fairly brutish and fairly short, unless you're one of the small number of elites who run the planet or something. Anyway, yeah. So how do you get out of that impasse? I mean, one of the suggestions that, well, I don't know. I mean, I've just asked a question in a previous video, about how good would life have to be in the future in order to justify the massive economic toll that it's taken on sentient flourishing and sentient pleasure and sentient well-being in the past. Never really got a great answer to that. A lot of people, or a number of people, criticised my worldview, but no one actually gave me an economic answer to it, which is fine. But I'm just trying to think, are there other kinds of responses I can make other than ask this economic question? And I'll have to give it some more thought to it. But for me, most of them seem to lie in the realm of the science fiction, or the realm of the religious, which is essentially the same thing in my book. I suppose here I'm reminded of, actually I was reminded of this by a Bill Hicks sketch I was listening to in the car a couple of days ago, in which he was talking about the Rodney Hill beatings that led to the LA riots a few years back. And here's this great sketch when he's talking about Officer Coon, and he makes great play of that word, of course. But how Officer Coon, who was one of the assailants one of the police officers who assaulted Rodney King, is supposed to have said something to the effect that the videotape of that is open to interpretation, and it depends on how you look at it, whether it's an assault or not. And Bill Hicks' take on that was, well, if you play the tape backwards, we're helping him up and sending him on his way. It's just great. Play the tape backwards, it's not an assault anymore. It's 4 police officers helping a black guy to his feet, sending him on his way. And that idea of time running backwards, which I know is just science fiction, don't get me wrong, I'm not offering this as any kind of philosophical solution to the woes of mankind. But, I mean, that's been played out in a number of places. I think Martin Amis' book, Time's Arrow, does something similar, in which the Nazis in the concentration camp, if I remember correctly, are kind of recast as kind of heroes in that world, because they go into these houses of horror and pull out corpses and bring the corpses back to life, millions of them. It's also the subject of a Philip K. Dick story, Counterclock World. I can't remember much about that one. That's the only one in which the idea features, well, just some of the logistics of that features. In Counterclock World there has to be particular etiquette around bathroom activities and eating activities. People do those things very much in private, because obviously eating in that world is much more like vomiting and go into the bathroom just doesn't bear thinking about. So yeah, I mean obviously this is just science fiction, but if this world was running backwards, instead of this increasing diversification amongst species, instead of this increasing diversification and multiplication of the amount of difference and space and all that kind of stuff there are in the world, in which, you know, the explosion from the Big Bang leads into this river delta of diversification and the kinds of competitions and strategies for survival that diversification represents. You know, to reverse the movie of the whole universe sees that river delta coming together. You know, the river out of Eden that Richard Dawkins talks about, in which species diversify, is reversed, so the flow goes upstream and species come together and merge and common ancestor becomes common descendant, and common descendants all come together, so we join our anthropoid ancestors in a common descendant, somebody like Lucy, and then we meet our primate cousins and merge with them a few million years further back, and then we join forces with the lizards, and we join forces with the birds, the aves, and eventually we join forces with the bacterium, I guess, and then eventually we become single-celled life. We keep rewinding the picture, and the DNA molecule unwinds to RNA and then unwinds further out into basic proteins, and then they decompose or recompose or move into being amino acids, and then amino acids become basic compounds, carbons, and all the rest of the elements, and then the elements break up as everything gets hotter and hotter and more energetic, and everything becomes hydrogen, and then it becomes subatomic particles, and then it becomes raw energy, and space shrinks and deflates until we become the singularity at the end of time. I guess it wouldn't be the omega point, it would be the alpha point. We'd be going from omega to alpha. That'd be alright. I don't know how you do that. Well, you couldn't do it in real life. But I guess if you were of a religious frame of mind, you could probably build a religion like that and just say, oh yes, well what's happening here is, it may look horrible, but that's just because we experience life backwards. In actual fact, everything's getting better. We are going arse backwards into the unknown, but in front of us is our history, and we can see our history in front of us, and it's a history of consilience and of coming together and of reunion and of approach to the singularity. Don't worry about the past. Don't worry about the horrors and where the world's going. Don't worry about the Gulf. Don't worry about oil. Don't worry about anything. We know what the future holds, and it's the Big Bang at the beginning of time.